be the one people call on those very, very rare occasions when everything doesn't go quite so well. So I don't want it to seem like I always have something going wrong. You know, I think everything is great most of the time, and they're doing such a great job. But we have recently identified some gaps in our continuum of care in our community, especially, for example, for people who may need a higher level of care than the diversion center is able to provide, but do not meet the standards for inpatient admission in a hospital. And we do encounter people. So often if they call the crisis hotline for screening, they may be sent to an emergency department, but if they're not admitted, they may be stabilized and observed for a few hours. And if they're not admitted to the hospital, they're going to be released, often in the middle of the night with nowhere to go and no way to get there. And we still have not addressed that gap in service in our community. In the community input recommendations, one of the recommendations was that we do also add an additional crisis center with no screening required, no one turned away, walk-in access. But we now realize that may be more intensive than what we had originally envisioned. It may need to be tied to a hospital, I don't know. But I hope this board will take the time to consider what we do need and recommend something to fill that gap during the coming year. I know it's not going to happen overnight. And of course, we have made some formal recommendations. We read them last week, or the last meeting. We sent them along and read them. We did ask the board continue the community input committee and to find a new convener because our convener has stepped down. And we further would like to, my public comment includes further, I'd like to see us explore more fully whether we're meeting our goal and our primary purpose of diversion from jail. How many people are being arrested each week versus how many are referred to the diversion center? And how can we improve and help to better meet the goal of diverting more people from the jail? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. So I want to first be able to just address a couple of your public comments to let you know you are not unheard as you all come in and you give your time freely to us, and we are very grateful and appreciate it. So if you can recall from the last meeting, and it's actually in the minutes as well, the one thing that we are waiting for from you all, we have the raw data from your group. We need the actual report with the recommendations. So I like to be fair all across the board, and the same thing that we require of the Adams Board and other entities, we require it from you. We are also volunteer members. We cannot sift through raw data, and so while we appreciate it and we're grateful when you give us a report that has been with a narrative and some recommendations written down, we can there share with the full board so we can talk about how we may integrate, if possible, some of your recommendations to let you know that we not only hear you, but we take them seriously and want to make sure that your time is used in a good space. The second thing you mentioned, your convener. And so I think that Director Oseki also shared in the last meeting that while they have done the bulk of what you have asked for in terms of support, no one can unconvene you, which means you don't need necessarily a convener to decide to meet. What you may need is the resources. So if you have enough volunteers like committed to what you're doing, they can take over that role of maybe being in a space of offering space or taking meeting minutes. You assign title and responsibility. And you know, you're very smart and Rosie's exceptionally bright. And so if you needed like guidance on like how to move forward with that because you're not looking to be taken apart, I'm happy to talk offline with you. And I think your last comment in regards to looking at the purpose, I think that is absolutely what those who are actually putting the resources into this project will do. I think what we get here is a very small component of what is happening in terms of data and figures, because at this moment, our committee has been, or this board has really been focused on making sure that we are getting people to refer into it and its utilization. But it doesn't mean the purpose has been lost in the data and for those who put their financial resources into it because it is government dollars. So just wanted to let you know you're heard. We appreciate your comments. We certainly appreciate you being here. And so for the actions that you have, please get back to us within the 3 months time frame, and we really like to be able to address them and move forward.
Okay, I did send something in writing. I don't know, was I supposed to send it to everyone?
We got it like really late last night, right? send it out. So you sent it late yesterday.
Yeah, I sent it actually before the originally planned meeting date.
Yeah,
And then I sent it again yesterday.
yeah, so we just need a
I
little bit
sent
more.
it a
Okay.
minute before the planned meeting.
Yeah, those were sent in the email, the original meeting email. And then the revised stuff that was sent yesterday was not enough notice to accept.
Yeah, so it wouldn't have been enough notice. So if you have it and we have it now with Tyler, that means we'll have these next 3 months
Yeah.
to kind of look through before we get back together. And that may even help us think about as a board, are we interested in breaking into committees, et cetera? There's some things structurally and formally that has to happen here, but I just don't want you to feel unheard and feel like you're coming every quarter and you're reporting out and then there's no action being taken by the board.
And then the last thing was, as far as the resources, basically all we need is either a place to meet for our meetings or the platform for online. And we had some informal conversations, and we thought Metro was going to provide that, but obviously that has fallen.
Well, we can also make some recommendations about places you can meet for free. There are always places you can meet for free in good old Cuyahoga County.
Okay, thank you.
So, all right, thank you. Any other public comment?
That was the only one, unless, well, you could go ahead, Judge.
Yeah,
If you want to go.
I would like to go. Okay, a couple of points I'd like to make. As you know, I'm David Mattia, common pleas judge, and run one of our drug court dockets, the medication-assisted treatment docket, which deals mainly with people suffering from opioid use disorder. So 2 weeks ago, we had a woman who was going to plead into drug court. She was a Medina County resident, got herself arrested in Cuyahoga County, ended up on my docket, was going to be in our court. She had used that morning. She was high in court, and we thought, yeah, let's send her over to the Diversion Center, get her through detox, and then come back next week. Diversion Center won't take a non-Cuyahoga County resident. That's what we were told. I would ask that policy be changed. We're going to treat her in our court system. Medina County doesn't have any place to send her. I had no place to send her other than county jail, which I did not send her to. But that's a problem. We obviously have the capacity to treat one more person. So I would ask that we take a look at that policy. Number two, had a chance to talk to Tom Olmstead, who's with St. Vincent's recently. And as you know, they're no longer doing, inpatient detox. I asked Tom, how many people do you detox or had you detoxed on an annual basis? And, prior to COVID, it was 1,600 a year. Post-COVID, 1,200. They're closed. That's 12 to 1,600 individuals who are not getting access to detox on an annual basis. We need to reach those individuals because, that capacity has not been replaced. Again, we all know that the Diversion Center has capacity. Talked about maybe a public relations campaign, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you wake up and you just can't cut one more catalytic converter off of a car to feed your habit. People need to know where to go, and we need to step up our PR campaign, or at least have one. So we need to do some advertising. And then point number three, I'm going to be a little blunt here. You need to change your name. The Diversion Center is false advertising. We were supposed to be diverting them from prison. We're not doing that. You're not, there's clearly a need for the Diversion Center. It's a great place, well-staffed. But the county jail numbers are not changing under this metrics. I sent a letter around a couple of months ago talking about maybe doing a program with the criminal justice system, in particular Cleveland Muni Court. Somebody gets arrested for a felony who's going to end up possibly in county jail. Have a program where the bond condition is you go to the Diversion Center at the Muni level before you're bound over, and you complete it. If you don't, well, no, you don't. You're fine. And these are substance use disorder folks. And And then when they get bound over, we know that either they've done well or they haven't done well, and they need more resources. But gives us a leg up on the pretrial process. We have to involve the felony criminal justice system in this, and we're not doing that. And we're not, the way it's structured now, we're not reducing the county jail population at all, unless we are somehow in like 3 years where the person who has a mental illness gets treated by the diversion center, he doesn't commit that felonious assault when he's unmedicated in 3 years because he would be medicated. So I don't know if we have to go back down to Texas and take a look at how Bexar County does it, but the way it is now is not working, and we can't ignore that. We want to make it better. We want to have it fulfill its original intended purpose to be a center of diversion from county jail. And the types of people that we're treating now, most of which are walk-ins, they're well served, but we need to help the people that would otherwise eventually end up on the mental health docket or one of the drug court dockets, or neither. There's a question. I don't know if the public comment calls for questions, but
Let's see. Can we take your question? Okay. Go ahead, Lou.
Okay, this I definitely support of what Judge just said there. The situation is not only the people going through the court, even in our existing community homeless shelter systems. We have people, last week I just helped a person. This person has been in our county for over a year, but since her ID not expired yet, she didn't think about changing her ID to Cuyahoga County address. So she was refused to go into a diversion center. And this situation has been common. And if the jail will accept the people from other counties, then why our services still restrict the access? Especially, I'm talking about even the people, they can prove they have been in the county for a long time. It's just because nowadays we know ID, all these stuff are expensive. People will not think about changing ID, until it's a day to renew an ID again. So I think we really should reconsider that particular rule.
Thank you, Lou. Okay. Well, Judge and Lou, thank you. I'm sorry. Did you want to respond, Brandy?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'd like
sure.
a couple comments, Chair. Thank you. The out-of-county discussion, I think, is a fair point. This is actually the first time that I've heard it from this perspective. We put that in place, as you can understand. There's 50 beds in the facility, and there's a priority for Cuyahoga County. Me personally, obviously with the board and administration, I think it'd be important to discuss, someone like in our jail, it absolutely makes sense for jail reduction in my head that we would take someone at the diversion center, even if they're out of county, out of state. But I think to just say, open to anyone, provide, that too is challenging. So we would have to discuss and possibly put some parameters around what does that mean. There's unique circumstances, obviously, and so that would have to be the discussion. But, for good reason, I think there were some items that came up, people coming in from out of county at the very beginning, and that's why we wanted to make sure, hey, this is a large investment and we can't help everyone. We want to make sure that first and foremost, the residents of Cuyahoga were the priority. So I think that that's a good discussion to have. I did just want to acknowledge the work of Adams and others, particularly the last few months with outreach efforts. I can tell you that the last couple of months I have consistently heard about, the diversion center, and people mentioned it to me in my personal and professional life much more than previously. We've really worked hard, or they have too, and they do have time on the agenda later. I'd turn it over to them. In their renewed contract for this year, I made sure to put expand outreach efforts. They're going to police not only like staff meetings, but the roll calls, different first, second, third shift roll calls. They're very engaged throughout the county, and I don't mean one or two, I mean many throughout the county. Police departments, all levels, supervisory level, chief level, people that are on the streets. So they've really made a lot of efforts, and not even just police departments, quasi-police departments, other people who engage. We talk almost daily, and they're constantly with community efforts and other people getting the word out, answering questions. We actually have a policy already with St. Vincent and have been receiving their patients since they have closed. So that's already in place, and it's actually going pretty well. Dr. Testa, our psychiatrist, is here, and I'm sure she can speak to that. And before they even closed, the team made sure to have that put in place, that policy we worked on prior to closure. So that's going well. So some of these things, I think that's why, our board in here is important to discuss, to know that, what's being addressed, but obviously there's always improvements that we can do. Let's see, there was one other item I had just wanted to touch on, and I apologize that it escaped me, but I think some of these might be answered when the end of year report from Adams comes up, and then following that, if not, then maybe as a board, we can discuss. Oh, Chief, I don't know, maybe if you want to mention, I know my biggest priority is the reduction in the jail population. That was our initial intention and has always been, and I feel really strongly about that for the diversion center. And I will say, and you'll see that the police use of the center has been consistent in increasing. It's not as much as I would like to, but, I also get feedback from them often also that, a lot of times someone goes to the diversion center that otherwise would have went to jail. So just because it doesn't show, or just because they didn't go through the diversion center process, doesn't mean that it didn't have that effect of diverting them. So, comments, Chief? I'm sorry.
No, you're right, that numbers are steadily going up, I think. And also, stressing to not only my supervisors, but general, just how important it is to divert as many people as we can, to keep the population out of jail if we can. There's some instances, so that's just being stressed again from my deputy to the troops and so forth. So again, there's some other issues that we talked to offline, but I think the main value of it, that not everyone go to jail. They realize that. And if you look at the overall population, the arrests from the division of police is down significantly. So we're trying to push people in jail and so forth, and it's trying to continue to push those numbers up.
We've seen repeat officers now, because I always look for that too when I look at the list. But we can always continue to outreach and continue to do better, and we want everybody to hear about it and know it's a resource. But the census being consistently the last couple months, I think, were some of those efforts. But obviously, we can continue to do that and need to always.
Can I ask a point
Yeah,
of
please.
clarification of the judge? Judge, were you addressing the lack of diversion going on at the level that the chief is addressing, or were you proposing that there be some other point of contact from the judicial system in terms of diversion?
Both. I mean, there's, I suggest a muni court program, and as I sit here, thinking about our arraignment room, if I wanted to order as a condition of someone's bond that they go and detox at the diversion center or go and get treated for the mental illness at the diversion center, the diversion center wouldn't take them, because I understand, because it's not, quote, voluntary. And I think that's an unnecessary barrier to getting a reluctant class of people the help they need. If they leave, they leave. I'm not saying it's going to be a lockdown facility, but if they leave, then we know, at least at this stage, they're very pre-contemplative and they're not going to, respond well. But most people in county jail are held there. They're not guilty of anything. They're held pre-trial. So, until we resolve their case, the delay between somebody sitting in county jail for 3 months while their case resolves versus getting them started on the road to recovery really could pay dividends if we look at it differently.
I was gonna mention this, later on in the meeting, but, you know, some of the efforts that have occurred recently have been, working with, the probation department with the county and central booking and, the courts, and have been for individuals that have a probation violation, so they're out, they have a PB, and they have to come to court, whether they have a dirty urine test or whatever that is, that there's a process now in place and a policy for those individuals to be diverted from the jail, and it's worked. The very first day they opened central booking, someone was diverted. Now, I will say those numbers are fairly low, but one of the measures that are being used to make some of the judges more comfortable when they make the final decision on whether it's okay for that individual, rather than spending the time in jail, to go to the diversion center for their needs, was having, for example, I almost said GPS bracelets. And there was a couple weeks there where I just learned, which, I mean, these things happen where those were maxed out for the jail. And so there's, and this is just a recent new pilot program, but I see that as the opportunity for some real success. People that are on probation, they would otherwise, when they need to go in because of something happened, a violation, they would spend that time in jail, but really they need help for their services, whether it be an addiction or on the mental illness side. And so diverting those people before they even go up into the jail, bringing them over, is the policy and process that we have in place. Between that and the pilot that we've mentioned previously with the specialty courts, with Megan Patton and the Diversion Center and Adamsport, I think we've had about 15 to 20 people over the last 2 months. So I expect that to increase. Again, some of it was low from other parameters that we just need to work through, but I think that is some of the cause for the increase, which has been good and makes me feel good, because it's also really that mission of keeping people out of the jail and getting them the services they need.
Thank you, Brandy.
Yeah.
Could we respond, Judge, like, you could make it a condition of someone's bond to go to the diversion center. The thing is, you would also have to like talk them into doing it voluntarily and be okay with it if they walked. So I think it's not that we wouldn't take someone if they had that as a condition of their bond. Like, some judges have ordered them to go, but it's just, nobody can make them go. They'd have to also agree, and we do our best to engage them. So if you feel like you want to use us, but you didn't think you could put it in their bond, you can. It's just then they would still have to call Frontline and refer and be willing to at least try it. And you'd have to be okay with the judge as this person might walk, which it sounds like you.
I think we need to talk about I'm one of 34 judges. I'm in the arraignment room every 34 weeks. You know, we need to think it through, but if you're open to that, that sounds like we can make some progress.
As long as they're referring, like as long as they're referring through Frontline, they come in, they come in willingly, and the judges are okay that they walk. That's, a lot of people come in that are on probation.
And maybe we get to the point where we have a diversion center ambassador in the arraignment room who could smooth the transition. And, there's getting from 1200 Ontario to East 55th Street without getting lost on the way and going to see your push, is it called? A new word I just learned for dealer recently. So
Push?
the push? I don't know. So, yeah, more than this finance major ever wanted to know.
Thank you for sparking a very spirited conversation with public comments. It looks like, in summary, what you're asking is that the board, especially those who represent county staff, take a different look at the name of the diversion center, the marketing opportunities for the diversion center, in which I believe Ms. Carney addressed very well, recognizing that there is limited space and that there is street outreach being done as read as word of mouth versus a large campaign. And the last thing is making exceptions to the existing policy regarding those who are in county, how we look at it and consider. So it sounds like they're all open to do those things, and they've responded adequately to the other things. And in terms of the wording around conditions versus mandate, I think that's very tricky. So you definitely need an offline conversation about how you want to proceed. I don't know if a condition in court is a voluntary response. So I would be very strategic about how you want to proceed with that. All right, so if there are no other public comments, we can move on to voting items. So give you all a minute. You should all have the meeting minutes in front of you. Take a look at them. Come back at 2:04 to let me know if there are any corrections or edits that need to be made.
Judge, can I ask you a question? I'm Amy Corval Joe.
Yeah, oh,
How are you? Nice to see you.
nice
Do you
to see
think the
you.
judges would be open, a group other than you, to discuss that process?
Say that again?
Do you think a group of judges would be open to that discussion, other than you recognizing that you
Sure.
run the treatment court?
Yeah.
Okay,
I think that that's something you all can discuss at the conclusion of this meeting.
thank you.
It's 2:04. Does anyone else have any edits or feedback they want to offer after they review the board meetings? The board minutes, my apologies. All right. Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make it.
Second?
I'll second.
All right. Motion to approve made by Chief Drummond, second by Brandy Carney. All in favor? Aye. All right, thank you. Approved. All right, so I'm gonna actually punt it back over to Brandy to initiate our discussion in regards to voting for a new chairperson.
Oh, thank you.
You're so welcome.
So just briefly, we, as mentioned and included on the agenda, we're going to and had expected to do a chairperson vote today. However, after discussion with our law director, he asked for a formality that still needs to occur, that we postpone it and table it, and it be on the next diversion board meeting, please. We'll include it on the next agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Carney. All right, so anyone who's interested in becoming the chair, start to think about it. Chair wheel spinning for the board. All right. Any questions or additional comments before we move on to the next agenda item? All right, metrics overview and discussion. So do we have a representative from the Adams Board who would like to come up and give 2022 year-end metrics updates? Hello, Claire.
Hello.
I'm gonna turn it over to you if you're okay with that.
I'm Claire Rosser, Chief of Strategic Initiatives with the Adams Board, and what I have for you today is actually the year end, so looking at all of 2022. You'll see that most of the information is within that calendar year, but some information is from the inception of the Diversion Center when it opened in May 2021. Each slide is marked as to time frame so that you understand exactly what piece of data we're looking at. So next slide, please. So overview, we're going to cover the typical areas that we do under the contract components of the Adams Board, but then there's also a deeper look at, we have a special section on law enforcement to look at those clients that come from a law enforcement referral as well. Next slide. This you'll be familiar with. This is the 2022 expenses for the areas of responsibility in the county contract with the Adams Board, which includes frontline service for the call center, Oriana House for operations, and then the Adams Board for CIT training. Next slide. So overall, starting with frontline, so that's calls. That's the referral in to the diversion center. Being able to take a look at the full year, you can see that the calls to frontline are trending up. You can see the difference between Q1 through Q4 there. Now the blue represents community. Those are calls that came from self-friend referral community agency, and then the orange is from law enforcement. And you'll see that overall the number of calls are increasing. All calls from all sources are increasing. But where they originate, the percentage of where they originate is largely the same. About 30% of calls originate from law enforcement. Again, calls from law enforcement are increasing along with all the other sources as well. Next slide, please. So this breaks it down if you wanted to see the numbers in a different format. So overall of the total to date, so that includes all of 2021 plus our calendar year, we've received a total of 1,617 total calls, and of those frontline authorized 1,481 individuals to go to the diversion center, and of those remaining 136 callers, 73 were referred to services that better fit their needs, 27 were denied by the diversion center, and 36 had other circumstances. Again, it breaks it down by percentage so that you can see overall from inception, 29% of calls to frontline service for the diversion center are from police officers, and the remaining 71% are from all other categories: self, friends, family members, and agencies.
Can I make a quick comment here? So the relationship I mentioned with St. Vincent closing, those calls actually do not go through Frontline. And someone correct me if I misspeak here, but we wanted, obviously for triaging, all calls go through Frontline, but when St. Vincent was closing, the staff at Oriana did training with St. Vincent, and they were confident, since they are medical staff there, that they would be able to refer the appropriate individuals over to the diversion center. And so because of that, those calls are the only ones that do not go through Frontline. So just for numbers' sake, I wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so then this takes a look at the admissions. Again, we have it broken down from where the referral source was. So since the opening of the diversion center in May 2021 until December 31st of last year, 809 total admissions have occurred. So that would be 551 new clients and 258 returning clients from 1,604 contacts. Now, contacts are instances when a potential client arrived at the diversion center. As we know, the diversion center is a voluntary facility, and a person can opt out at any point in the process. So they may not have gone all the way through the intake and admission process. This, the chart breaks it down by how many of those referrals came from law enforcement. So what's interesting to look at there, I think, is how many of them qualified as a pre-arrest client. So they met those parameters at being an adult with a low-level nonviolent offense, and how many were non-criminal. They had an interaction with law enforcement, but there was no potential arrest activity or offense, and the law enforcement officer wanted to connect them to services. So again, 31% of all of those admissions from over that time came from police. Next slide, please. So if you look at admissions, admissions have been trending up as well. And this is a look at the year overall. You can take a look at how that has increased over time. And in the first quarter monthly average of last year was 41, compared to the last quarter monthly average was 68, and that's a 66% increase from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Now, information that I didn't have calculated at the time of the original, when this meeting was originally scheduled, but I do have now. It follows if admissions are trending up, then the average daily census would be trending up as well. So we were able to take a look at that and able to see that at the beginning of 2022, average daily census, we know that, the diversion center has had up to 25 or so on any given, on a day and time. But what's the average over the course of that quarter? In the first quarter, we were able to see that it was 10.57, so 10 or 11 average daily census individuals within, and by the end it was 14 individuals on any given day, average daily census for that. So if you look at that, average daily census has increased 103% from the beginning of 2022 to the end of 2022. And those increases happened fairly steadily over the course of the year. If you look at the change from quarter one to quarter two, it was about a 35% increase. And then if you look at the next quarter increase, it was another 35 on top of that. And then from the third to fourth quarters, another 10% on top of those gains that had already been made. So it has been steadily increasing over that time. Next slide. Okay, so again, this is another way to look at that data that breaks it down by quarters over the full amount of time. One thing that I will note, that I usually do note with this, is that this is calculated by discharge date, not intake date. Which means that for precise purposes, you should always be looking at the most recent monthly report to know exactly the client count for that previous amount. But again, this looks at the whole year, so we've calculated that. Next slide. And then to take a look at the client experience, this is again since inception. We know that 188 of the individuals had serious mental illness, and 123 had substance use disorder. But the primary diagnosis is actually dual. They had serious mental illness and substance use disorder overall. You can see a breakdown of the types of services that are provided. And then we also were able to look at the average length of stay over the course of that full time, and it's typically people will stay the 4.63 days. Next slide. Oriana House conducts a client satisfaction survey for people who are discharged from the center. So this is just a small snapshot of that report, and it's from July to September of 2022. 23 surveys received. That's a 15% response rate, and you can see that that there are high levels of agreement that the staff helped understand what was expected of them. They achieved their goals, felt secure and safe. Mental health was addressed in a positive way, and other questions of that nature. Next slide. Okay, so this takes a look at that question of connections to aftercare. After someone's stabilized at the diversion center, what happens next? So you can see that the diversion center referred 451 clients to 90 partner agencies. The colorful circle around there represents all of those different agencies, which I think, just visually that shows that, I think that data shows that Oriana House is working to make sure that people are connected to the right thing for them while they've been in care. They're definitely utilizing those community connections and resources. The biggest areas for referral are Frontline Service, Signature Health, and Y-Haven. Next slide. Okay, so this is how that breaks down. So 451 of those 809 intakes were connected to a behavioral health direct service provider, system partner, or another referral upon discharge from the diversion center. Now, as we've discussed at length in this group before, being able to follow, having the evidence and data to follow who received services upon those referrals, there's a time gap with that, and there's limited systems for being able to look at that. However, what we do know so far is that at least 21% have followed through with a referral, and that was verified by electronic enrollment and claims systems. We're going to be taking another look at that. I think it's I might get this time frame wrong, but I think it's they have within a year or so to actually enter that into the right system. So you don't necessarily know, you don't necessarily see the data back as to who followed through on those particular services. There's a time lag. But again, we know that 21% followed through. We're going to be taking a look at different time periods to be able to and that those numbers will increase with that. So then 358 clients refused or did not receive connections. 69% of those were actually, or 69 of those were actually transferred to another facility for health reasons. So they were receiving the right connection for them, what they needed then. But then we also had 285 who left AMA against medical advice, against the advice of the Oriana staff, which again, it's a volunteer program. You can step out at any time without going through what they recommend as the completed program. And then involuntarily discharged due to violation of rules was just 4. Next slide. So really what that shows us is that about 65% or 65% of clients since inception left with some level of success. And you can see how that breaks down into percentages here as well. Next slide. Okay, so taking a look at those clients that came from law enforcement referrals. This is going to be broken down by those clients who were brought by police. What potential offenses or charges were they facing if they were a pre-arrest referral? how many departments have utilized, how many police departments have utilized the diversion center, and then, of course, our CIT training numbers. So next slide. All right, so this is again just calendar year 2022. So the number of calls. This is really taking someone from that very first call from law enforcement to final discharge. Who made it through the whole process here? So we had 293 calls from police to frontline service for a referral for an individual. Of those, the number of calls from police that frontline authorized to go to the diversion center is 265. So what happened to those other calls? 9 of those clients refused services, again, volunteer program. 12 clients were transported to an emergency, to a hospital emergency department or another facility that better fit their needs. They needed a different level of care. 5 clients were denied and 2 clients had other circumstances. So then 140, that's the number of client admissions. So those are the actual, were transported to the diversion center by police, went through the entire admissions process. So why is that lower than the number of authorized calls? So again, the diversion center is voluntary. They may opt out before transport. However, the other thing that we see is that officers might resolve that concern in the field after calling. So the final number of clients from police who completed successfully, so that, you know, we've talked about what that definition of success is for this. 30, that's 51. So 39 of those clients were admitted, who were admitted from police, completed successfully and accepted referrals. 12 people completed successfully, but they did not want referrals. And then 16 clients, again, they needed to go somewhere else because of health reasons. And 73 of those clients left against medical advice. Next slide. So if we take a look at the pre-arrest, so we're breaking that down even further. These are clients that were referred to the diversion center by police because they met those parameters of being an adult, engaged in a low-level offense that put them at risk for arrest, nonviolent offense. So if you take a look at those again from the time we started tracking it, which was June 27th, 2021 to the end of last year, what are those types of offenses that we're seeing? The largest category is trespassing, and then there's also criminal trespass as a part of that, and disorderly conduct. Domestic violence is one that is not a nonviolent offense. We discussed that in this group before. Early on, there were domestic violence charges that potential charges that went to the diversion center, but that process has been, those types of clients are not being referred into the diversion center at this point. That was an early on situation. And then loitering. So, and then there's less than 1% that is these other types of offenses. Next slide. All right, so then if we take a look at the number of law enforcement departments within Cuyahoga County, there are 59 law enforcement departments. 30 of those have used the diversion center since its inception, so that's about 51% of our law enforcement entities have used it. Next.
Sorry, is that 51% of police departments?
Departments, yeah. So we've got 59 law enforcement departments across Cuyahoga County. 31 of them have used it, so yeah, it's about half.
There's actually, those are the municipal police departments, so there's also like, you know, so many more Cleveland Clinic, and so just to mention, a lot of those others have used it also.
Yeah.
RTA, those are Muni Court, or Munis.
Okay, and then again, moving on to that final piece of the Adams Board contract component, the CIT training, the crisis intervention team training to law enforcement, which again, this excludes the City of Cleveland numbers, which are done under an agreement specifically with the City of Cleveland. This breaks down the numbers. We've seen more than 1,000 officers trained as part of this contract, and that represents 67 agencies. Like Brandy said, there are police departments that are a wider range across the community, but also includes security and protective services, et cetera. So 67 different agencies have been involved in CIT and have CIT officers as of since March of 2021. Next slide. And then just, I've included just a couple of stories here. A sister of a client who received substance use treatment. She said, "My family and I believe the diversion center saved my brother's life. If he never was given this option, he may have never taken the steps to get on the right path." We hear that feedback. Next slide. And then also from the law enforcement perspective, Chief Scott Meyer with the Euclid Police Department, he told us a story of how a family friend was struggling with alcohol and had no insurance, no means to get help. And the family connected with the diversion center and was just very impressed with what the staff and facility was able to do. The client was linked to residential treatment in the community after completing the detox services and remains in treatment. And I think this quote from Chief Meyer is interesting and kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier about that culture shift that happens with diverting rather than arrest. And he said, "Having the diversion center as a resource has renewed in me an effort to ensure our officers know how best to help individuals with addiction and mental illness." So just knowing and receiving that promotion and outreach and information about the diversion center has led to more conversations within the department about how they interact with individuals with mental illness and addiction. Next slide. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions for Claire?
Claire, that was very helpful. Could you, there's this large number of people who are getting referred and not ending up there. And I understand that you said some of them are not going through. But you said some it seemed to be resolved with the police officer.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Or
So sometimes what we're hearing is that the officer, they know to connect with frontline service when they're having an interaction with someone who's having these types of struggles. That's a connection that they've had for years and decades. So they may call for advice. It may be someone who is eligible and appropriate for the diversion center, and that's presented as an option. But then that person may not want to. It's officially a diversion center referral because that's what's top of mind for that officer when they call. They say, "I might have somebody for the diversion center," and then as they move on in conversation with this person, they decide to connect them to whatever natural supports that person. They probably already know that person, what natural supports they have within their environment. They don't follow through particularly on that. So I would say that's some of it. And so typically resolved in the field, I mean, the officers, you can probably speak to this, but this is something that is a daily part of practice.
I think if they can divert them, they will, but if they have other options, they'll make it available to the, I think that could be part of that being resolved. Because obviously you get up to the first
Yeah, and as Scott was just mentioning, so the types of de-escalation techniques that are taught through the crisis intervention team training as well. You know, our officers are good at being able to resolve the situation whenever is most appropriate in that moment, whether that means the diversion center, which is why they originally called, or connection to another higher level resource like the crisis stabilization unit. Or resolving that with the natural supports in the community.
thank you.
Thank you, Donna, for the question. Any other comments or questions for Claire? Yes, Judge.
Just noticed the police referral success rate is so much lower than the self-referral family. I mean, probably pretty obvious, but do you have any insights as to the whys there?
I mean, I would point to Oriana staff to
I
answer
could
that.
speak to it. The police referrals that we see, they're often more ill, and they almost always have mental illness, and it's pretty serious, and it's pretty chronic, and they often are like chronic treatment refusers, and so we do our best, and we do see them. They'll often, like the officers will bring them, they might walk out within a day or so, and then they often refer themselves back. So sometimes we make progress with them later, but you'll see that in the community numbers because they were introduced to us by the officers, but they weren't ready, and then they came back as a community. So but what clients the officers bring with us, they're high need and they might not be ready. Like they weren't trying to be with us, but when they are ready, they come back often.
Thanks.
You said the average stay is around 4 days. Is there a maximum amount of time that a person can stay at the diversion center?
Up to 9 days is our target, but occasionally there is a person that we've set up for referral because we actually transport them to that referral where we have to wait a day or so for the bed to become available. So we shoot for no longer than 9, but occasionally there are exceptions where we keep somebody a little bit longer simply because we want to release them directly into a bed at another provider.
Claire, thank you. So super helpful and informative. The CIT numbers, we talked about this a couple meetings ago, went down in 2022. Does the board think those are going to increase this year and future years, or do you think we're going to kind of continue to see a lower level? Any ideas?
What we discussed before was, if you reach a certain saturation level with it. So I don't know if have our numbers changed in our expectations, or that would be, I think
About
we're.
the same.
I can say for the contract this year, as I mentioned at the last meeting, we did a 1-year renewal contract rather than, and we didn't go out for bid. I think I mentioned last time, we were having a new administration coming in and we're still, just hitting the 3rd year, so learning things. But we will likely have to rebid it again, but things like that we can look at. But the Adams Board has done a good job continuing to fill the classes with the CIT training.
Is that the specialized CIT or just a CIT training?
Yeah, so it actually breaks down with the, on that. So we have the 3 different types. So specialized, the 40 hours, the specialized CIT training. And then we also have the specific training for dispatch,
Yes.
and then refreshers as well. So those numbers are broken down in there as well.
There's success dealing with folks that in crisis.
I mean, I.
The reason why I'm asking is I
Yeah.
have a specific reason for asking.
Okay.
Answer, Judge, just quickly that I know you usually send your CIT unit to the training, but what we encourage and we have throughout the rest of the county is officers of any level, not the specific unit, is who
Right.
take the 40-hour
Right.
classes.
Right.
So that's the difference that might help here.
And with us, because
Right.
I like to have all officers specialized CIT training, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
However, we volunteers.
Right.
And that's
That's exactly it. Yeah.
That's why I was asking that particular
Yeah.
question.
If I may add too, right, and then under the settlement agreement, which you have certain parameters and certain courses set
Yes.
for you with the specialized training, right? But most officers are going through the specialized training, and remember the whole thing, like you're saying, it's voluntary. We can't force anybody to take it. And remember, the Adams Board, we're offering $150 per day to encourage people to come that go back to the police department. But actually, this whole sort of setup with the CIT kind of goes against the national model. Remember when we talked all about that at the beginning? So, yeah. But as new officers start coming on in other departments, right, that, it'll continue to have CIT.
So can I ask, you still have that still is happening, the $150 per officer per day going back to the department, right? Okay, got it, sir.
And
As
I can
Adams
say
Board
from
funding this
somebody
season.
who watches a lot of body cam, I don't know what CIT training they've done, but you can tell the difference between who has and who has not been trained at all.
That's good to know.
I love that.
It's-
And I watch a lot of body cam. And you can see, to your very point, the difference in those who are CIT trained and those who are specialized CIT trained. So the big difference, and again, I think it's important to stay with the national model of volunteers.
Yeah.
So we find is those particular individuals that personal experiences maybe, or not
Right.
themselves, some family members and so forth. That's why that should be.
For the 29 police departments who have not yet used this particular diversion center. I know we talked a little bit about marketing in the beginning, so, and you all were given great credit by Brandy about how you've been engaging. Do we have like a different method or strategy for those who we have yet to engage? Just a quick question.
Yeah, well, I can actually, we received a similar question. And Carol Ballard, our Director of Education and Training, who's in charge of the CIT training, also noted that her training staff is going out to all of the different roll calls for all of the different departments and providing that kind of one-on-one department education about it. However, some of those departments that you see are from the very, very small communities who may only have an officer or two total. Within, that's their department. And so, you know, their utilization of a resource like this is not expected to necessarily be high or so. You know, what you're seeing, I think, with the fact that we've had just in this first amount of time, about 50%, about half of the departments that have the capability to send a two-man car and do the transport to the diversion center is pretty significant. Not all departments are structured in quite the same way to be able to use it that way. But again, as part of that culture change within this discussion, thinking about how do we support those folks who would be going to jail, or would be going to a more to a non-therapeutic environment when they're suffering from mental illness and addiction.
I just wanted to add also that when they're going to the roll calls and things, they're specifically focusing on the diversion center, but they're also making an advertisement for CIT training.
Thank you, Clarence. Yeah. I know we can't trust anybody to get it done. Carol's going to get it done. Any other comments or questions for Claire before we move on?
If I could, just very briefly, and you touched on this, and I think it's great, in addition to reducing the jail population, which is key. You know, another focus I currently have is, you know, I'm very appreciative of the, you know, increase of police use of the center, but as she had mentioned, it's almost like 97% for mental illness, and so I'd really like to see, you know, the opportunity if someone's getting, you know, put in the back of the car, like rather than going to jail, which is they're so used to doing in police, and I understand that, but giving someone the opportunity to go to the center and use that as a resource, because that utilization is really low just on the law enforcement side, the detox services. I mean, I understand people have to be ready, I get it, but yeah.
I think part of that too is the culture.
That's huge.
It's huge, you know.
Yeah.
And it's huge.
Yeah.
To try to change the culture and so forth, but that's a huge step, absolutely. You're right, Brian, I think part of it, someone that's homeless, we know, a large percentage of our mentally ill, so that's who's being diverted there, so you're absolutely right, so it's getting that culture shift, and, you know, that not only mentally ill, you know, but folks that are other addictions and so forth, so that's right, and that's my job to try to do that, and to do that.
Well, we appreciate all the hard work that you have been doing, no doubt about it. And I think it goes into some of the specialized opportunities you all discussed during public comment, even the whole idea about what's happening with St. Vincent's and how do you fill in, so, and also consistently changing culture, which does not happen overnight. So if there are no other comments or questions for Claire, we can move on to the 6th agenda item. You ready? Old or new items, back to you, Chief.
So most of mine we did cover. I mentioned the RFP, the 1 year, so current. So moving forward, I'll start now, or we'll start now on putting together how we'll structure an RFP for next year. But obviously we'll share that, and you know the people we've been working with, it's been great. But you've learned a lot in the last 2 to 3 years too, which has been nice. So probably provide a better update at the next meeting. I do have a couple of brief items, but one item I want to mention, unfortunately, I just learned about this. We've really been very lucky to date We've been open since March 4th of '21 and have not, thankfully, had an OD at the Diversion Center, an overdose. And unfortunately, the last few days, there have been 3 different occurrences. 2 of those occurrences, I would say, was one individual. And I'm going to give Mike from Oriana, Vice President, a chance to speak. But I just want to say everybody knows in here, you know, there's a lot of policies and you can do many, many things, and to keep everything out of there is nearly impossible. I'm not saying it's an excuse. We immediately reacted, and I'll give him, you know, the opportunity. But, you know, I would love to not see any of those, and the individuals all seem to be okay, but it's important to share that with the board, and, but I just wanted to make note before he has a chance to.
Yeah, thanks, Brandy. Unfortunately, that is something that comes with this population, but whenever that happens, one of the first things we do, we look at the area, where it occurred, who was around. We try to identify as quickly as we can any additional individuals so we can have conversations with them. And like you said, out of the 3, 2 of them was tied to a single individual actually providing the drug to another person. And so we look at not only things we need to do different in terms of our operation, but we also have a clinical assessment done by Dr. Testa and her staff. And then if we need to adjust anything, we certainly will. So that's where we are.
Any questions?
Any questions for Brandy or comments or for Mike?
I have one unrelated item. I unfortunately also learned last night that Tyler, who's performing administrate for the board, so just want to say thank you that moving forward he has some other opportunities. It's my understanding. Do you want to say?
I'll actually be seeing a lot more of the chief, taking a position with the city of Cleveland. So
I just told you last night. We were together.
It just came through. So I look forward to. Thanks. I look forward to working with the chief more closely. But the county's been great, so I appreciate that. So Brandy, we'll keep you updated on who will take over the support role for the board and making sure that name and contact info gets over to everyone.
Yeah, Chuck to Chief Bird and others, and we'll provide that information to the board. So, but.
Can't believe I'm that bad at your leaving. It's okay. Well, we have no other discussions or comments for Brandy. I did just want to make a couple quick comments, Brandy. In terms of the RFP, the last chief that was here, when Mr. Mason was here, there was some commentary made actually by Mr. Heller in regards to making decisions and basing our recommendations on something that might be able to be included in the RFP. And so in order for us to, the board, to have a good handle on when that will be released and when input would be needed, is there any way to provide a timeline to us?
My goal is to make sure that the RFP is released at the very latest, so prior to released, and it usually is out for 3 weeks minimum, as we probably all know. So released on or before May 1st. I know that seems like a while, but there's a lot that goes into it so that I can meet the timeline for the end of the year. So I would say people are welcome to forward me, and I'm open to recommendations and discussions, for
Okay.
it.
Thank you so much. And then the other thing I was just randomly thinking as well. So I know before, I've mentioned this jokingly, but if there's any way, not that the officers are not busy enough and already short-staffed, that there could be some ambassador models in the marketing. And for those that do have time, we're talking about the stipend that they get for training. Maybe we can just have one other addition about if you're willing to go out, obviously as a volunteer, and just go on roll call with Carol and talk about how this has been working, and maybe how it provides ease to their job. I think that goes a long way with the folks that are actually on the ground doing it. I think it'll make it easier for Carol to sell, even though I know she's a hard worker and killing it. So I worked with her before, so I know she's killing
Yes,
it.
yes.
And then the last thing I have too, I know we mentioned some special pilots, and it could be me because perhaps I'm unprepared, which is could be true. But if there is an opportunity to get a list of some of the things that you have changed in terms of programming for the board, so we can have them ahead of time and kind of read into them, and also that way we're well versed if we get questions from community.
So I would say thank you. That's excellent. So the 2 pilots, because I knew it was the year-end report today, I didn't want to do anything. But prior to the next meeting, I'll send out the information to the group, and I'll present on those at the next meeting. I will say, most importantly, during my update, I forgot that, you guys saw the numbers for 22, but they've been actually consistently, increasing, and over the last couple of weeks, we've been around our highest population daily, 33, 34, so, there's been good numbers. There's a couple weeks where it went down to, high teens, 20s, but they've really, there's increased numbers over there, and it's kind of like the jail. It's not like you have every bed available to be filled. We can't have 50 people in there. You have to have some flexibility. Some of the beds are for certain people that need some extra care. So, but they've been really doing a good job with census as it's continued to climb. So just FYI. But
Thank
I'll
you,
have that.
Brandy. Donna, you have.
I wanted to just say something very positive and explain something that we went through, where it was a circumstance that Greater Cleveland Congregations was running into, where several of our leaders who had experienced deaths themselves of children due to mental illness and addiction, and they are now leaders in the community in working with the homeless population. They were bringing us complaints about the way that things were going in terms of referrals. And because of that, I brought those concerns to Brandy, to the Adams Board, and to Oriana. We were able to have a very positive meeting where our constituents brought their concerns, and I am happy to say that things were resolved in a very positive direction, and it created some ongoing relationships too, where our leaders now feel connected to Oriana in a direct way, and can make referrals, and those referrals can go smoothly. So.
Thank you, Donna. I'd too just like to congratulate all of you. It's difficult to bring a pilot, no matter how many times you go see someone else's model. Our great city and county is very different from other places. So it's very hard to kind of manipulate something to fit into a space and shape it up to something that works for you. So just like to commend the Adams Board, Oriana House, the county government for their level of work and commitment, and the judge. We don't see any other judges. There's judges here, committed, reading, studying, and just so all of you on the great work. And eventually, we've heard discussions of purpose 2 times today. We'll get to that purpose point and be able to see impact and just keep pushing together collectively as a team. So if there are no other comments, we can formally adjourn the meeting.